What's happening, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to the Crash Bang Boom Drumming Podcast. Today we're mixing it up a little bit in what I hope will be a small series of these interviews where I talk to drum companies about their history, manufacturing, specs, and all that goodness. So with that in mind, today's guest is Q drummer founder Jermey Berman. And as a fan of those Q drums, I was definitely ready to get into it. So I hope y'all dig it. And on a side note, during this conversation, I was unsure as to the exact 60s Ludwig reinforcement ring specs, but those were indeed 3-ply drums with a solid, generally 1-inch ring that was formed to fit the diameter of the shell. For all you Ludwig nerds out there, just saying. Crash Bang Boom Podcast can be found on my SoundCloud YouTube page, as well as Google Play, Podbean, Stitcher, Luminary, iTunes Podcasts, and more. Check out my Facebook and Instagram pages for additional content and updates, and please give me a like or a follow, etc. if you could. The support is appreciated. Shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press, who's pressing the hell out of some records presently, has a quicker turnaround than most in the game, and can help you with everything from design to mastering, electroplating, vinyl coloring options, packaging, and more. They even got a real-time quote generator for you to keep tabs of all that good stuff. So hit them up, and that's NewOrleansRecordPress.com. Given the present extended hiatus for both musicians and venues, keep your eyes and ears peeled for artists offering online lessons, master classes, workshops, and more, as well as fundraisers, charities, GoFundMes, and even websites like SaveOurStages.com, who are looking to save venues that are feeling the burden in these tough COVID times. So help any way you can. So without further ado, here we go. Jermey Berman, Q Drums, out in Los Angeles, making some beautiful sounding and looking drums. So check them out. Crash Bang Boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
All right, Jermey Berman, Q Drum Company founder. How are you doing, man? Thanks for hanging with me on the Crash Bang Boom Drumming Podcast. I'm excited to do something a little different and talk to somebody who actually has some insight as to the manufacturing and the whole process of actually creating drums, and in particular Q drums, which I'm a fan of. It'll be a different thing for me to do, but I nerd out on the components of drums and bearing edges and all that good stuff. So I get to ask you about all that good stuff today. But how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Hanging in there, man. You know, it's strange times, obviously.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I pretty much lost my day job, and then we're in New York, so it's wildly expensive, and I have 2 kids, and daycare is a nightmare cost here. So there's no shortage of shit that we're confronting in amidst all this.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, for myself, aside from Q drums, I'm also a touring drum tech, and that's actually where I make my living, and that's not going to happen for quite a while. Actually, there was a pretty well-known concert booking agent named Mark Geiger who wrote an article recently saying that in the U.S. specifically, touring is not going to be seen until like 2022. And I'm sitting here like, well, whoa. That's not good. I mean, that's not good for me as an individual, as a drum tech, right, or the industry in general.
Totally.
I mean, not only do I do that, but I also provide drums for touring musicians. And if they can't go tour and make money, they don't need drums from me. So It's a weird place we see ourselves in right now, you know?
Yeah, I bet.
But we'll get through it.
I'm glad to hear your optimism. That's comforting.
Well, you know, one thing I have found that I'm noticing, especially in our little community, is like if you're not working right now, you're probably bored. You're sitting at home, you're looking at your drums, probably don't have a lot of inspiration. What we have seen is huge uptick in companies giving away product and trying to be somewhat available to their clients. And, you know, I feel like that's helping. And a lot of guys are actually purchasing smaller drums, snare drums, for instance. And just having a new snare drum in front of them gives them a little bit of hope, inspiration to play, practice, do new things.
Absolutely.
And the beauty about that is, you know, a lot of guys are like, well, fuck it. If I can't play on the road, I'm going to set up a little recording studio in my house and just do remote recording.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of guys actually start to make a little bit of money doing that. And they're like, well, maybe I don't need to tour.
Right.
You know? And I think that is that's really cool to see, and that's what gives me some optimism as to the future of our industry, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Question for you, man. How long has Q Drums been making drums? As mentioned earlier, you're the founder. I guess tell me a little bit about the origins of the company and how long you've been doing it, and the process of just getting it up and running, and just the many components to actually getting an entire drum set, you know, together and out there into the world. There's so many facets to it.
Well, Q Drum started October of 2010, so we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary.
Nice.
Personally, I've been building drums for about 22 years. I started working in 1998 at a company called Rob's Recipe in Orange County.
Wow.
Which was a very, very short-lived experience that I didn't learn much from, other than don't build drums out of your garage. And then from there, I started working at Orange County Drum, which a lot of people will know and remember.
Yeah.
And I was there up until they closed their doors on their custom shop. And once that happened, you know, I started Q. I mean, there's a little more to that story. I didn't really want to build drums anymore. I actually wanted to build furniture.
Wow.
And I leased a shop, and at the same time that I had leased the shop to start building furniture, I had accumulated some tooling. And I went on tour with Katy Perry, and the drummer was Adam Marcello, who was playing, I think he was playing Shine drums at the time. And we needed a second drum kit for the tour. He wanted it to light up. He wanted to do this and that. And for him to get one from Shine was going to take too long, and I didn't want to have to redo the wiring for the lighting. So I was just like, well, you know what? I'll just build it for you. Built him a kit. Wow. No branding, no nothing. Obviously, Q wasn't really a thing at the moment. This was like February of 2010, and he loved the kit. He loved it so much. He's like, you should start your own company. And I kind of laughed it off. And he just kept pressuring me. And finally, I was like, you know what? Fuck it. That doesn't sound like a bad idea. Maybe I'll try it. And so, you know,
right.
Q was born.
Amazing.
You know, I blame him for all my problems. I'm not just kidding.
Amazing.
Yeah. So as far as like the process of building, we've gone through quite a few iterations of what we offer. Started off as being like 100% custom, whatever you want, we can do. Similar to like an Orange County Drum. But the difference for me was that, you know, I'd been building their drums for so long, and I'd been doing a lot of teching outside as far as like studio stuff, and realizing like there's some things that weren't really my vibe that I would build at Orange County Drum that I didn't want. If I'm going to start my own company, I didn't want it to be a part of my company.
Right.
You know, like 20, 30 ply, 40 ply vented snare drums.
Right.
Those are things that they were never my favorite, even when I was making them. I didn't really want that to be something that people, you used to work at Orange County Drum. Can you build this for me? And so I just said no.
Right.
Not that there's anything wrong with those drums. It's just not my bag. I've never had vented snare drums myself, even working at Orange County Drum.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of keep that a more classic vibe, sonically, visually, and all that. The one thing that we do that's quite a bit different than most companies is we incorporate metal into our drum kits, not just our snare drums.
Absolutely.
That is something I started back in 2007 on a whim. Honestly, it was sort of somebody asked me to do something weird. I had some extra material. I figured, why not try it? And it came out, and it was really cool. And when I started Q, I had some friends reach out asking, hey, can you do that for me, you know, under the Q moniker. So that's what ended up happening. Wow. And it sort of took off. It sort of became what Q is most known for.
Right. I think it's an interesting aspect of your company, and asking yourself the question that if snares sound good and metal snares sound good, be it brass, steel, or copper, why not build some kits like that? And then I like the idea of the whole like riveting for the seam. And then, of course, the wooden reinforcement rings gives you different options for bearing edges and whatnot. And you get a little bit of warmth in the wood. So the combination of all that, I think, was really interesting and something pretty specific to your design. And I mean, when I think about earlier steel kits, you know, I guess Ludwig did those big stainless steel kits.
Sure did.
Kind of one of the only ones that I can really think of. Fibes might have done the same. A lot of companies had wood kits with metal wraps over it to make them look like that.
Yeah, of course.
But I like what y'all did in doing the copper kits that y'all do are some of the most beautiful drum sets I've seen.
Thank you very much.
They're incredible, man. Tell me a little bit about sort of navigating the whole idea of using some of these metals for an entire kit, and then of course incorporating that wood and reinforcement ring in there as well and building them.
Sure. Well, you know, like you brought up the Ludwig stainless steel kit from the 70s specifically. Those were kits that I absolutely loved. I've owned a couple.
Yeah.
I've always thought that they sounded really cool, but they're one-trick ponies.
Totally.
They have one sound, and that's it. And if you can't dial the kit into that sound, you're screwed. I mean, you're not going to have a usable sound. And for me, one of the big things with Q is it's always been versatility. Look, if not everybody can afford 7 drum kits, one, you know, your bop kit, your rock kit, your whatever, this and that, and having that one do-all kit, to me is mandatory. And
right.
So every drum we make, we want it to be that way. And one of the things that the wood reinforcement rings really helps with the metal is you get the warmth in the attack. So it's not abrasive, it's not overbearing. It also controls a lot of the overtones of the metal. So now you have the tone that you want, but it's very usable. It's not overbearing. You have the warmth, like I say. And the edge that we cut on it is a much truer edge than trying to flange the metal.
Right.
And so with all of that, it just sort of came together. And I mean, I couldn't be happier with the end results.
Yeah.
Like I said, total fluke doing the metal kits, especially with the riveting. Basically, I had a sheet of steel that I was going to use for like a weird, trashy metallic sound, similar to like a shitty cymbal or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was using it on a tour that I was working on, and we didn't have a bass drum at the time. And when I bought the sheet of metal, I'm like, okay, if I cut this and make it weird, it'll sound shitty, just like on the record, but in a good way, right?
Right.
And I bought the metal, I took it to the shop, and I start hitting it with a stick, and I'm like, this doesn't sound like anything. This isn't going to work. So it was big enough to turn into a bass drum. And one of the guys at the shop with me, who actually works here, Max, we were shooting the shit about what we should do. And I was like, why don't we just try to turn this into a bass drum? Because we were, at the time at Orange County Drum, we were putting wood re-rings in snare drums quite often. And so I was like, this is sort of a no-brainer. How do we wrap the shell into a cylinder and have it hold? Well, let's just use rivets. You know, that's what we got on hand. Let's just do it. It looked super cool. It worked really well. The bass drum sounded great. And one of the other techs that I was working with on this particular tour, he happens to be the chief songwriter for a band called Pussifer with Maynard from Tool. Yeah,
of course.
And this is like at the very beginning of that band, and he's like, that is a fucking awesome bass drum. Can you make me a whole kit?
Wow.
So we made him a whole kit. And because of Matt specifically, you know, I think in 2011, when Pussifer was going out on like their second album cycle or something like that, he's like, I want to try something new. Can you do this in copper? And that was the start of the copper.
Wow.
And and it turned out pretty awesome. So yeah, I got to thank Matt Mitchell for all that, his inspiration. He always has great ideas and wants to kind of push our limits. And so yeah, the copper kit was born. We kept the rivets. We do weld, we do braze. We have a new snare drum that we unveiled at NAMM called our Union Series, and it's basically similar to our drum kits with the wood re-rings and the metal shell. But instead of riveting, we properly braze the seam, and then we roll a bead in the center, and then add the wood re-rings. And it's one of my favorite snare drums currently, but we have those capabilities. But there's just something about the rivets that I love, and aesthetically, I think they're amazing. But also, I don't want to change what's not broken.
Right.
The drums sound the way they sound, and I have a feeling a lot of that is because of the riveted seams. So
yeah, wow, man. Yeah, one of my friends, Justin Ripati, who plays in this band Hyborian, he has a Q drums kit, and that was the first one that I heard in the flesh, and I was like, God, man, this thing sounds incredible. So I got to see it up close and look at the riveting on the seam like we're talking about, and check out the reinforcement rings and this and that and the other. So it was really cool seeing it in the flesh and also hearing it and kind of make the connection sort of in my mind as to maybe some of the aspects that make it unique, but also both in design and in sound. So I thought it was, I think they're just really amazing sounding kits.
Oh, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
We're very proud of them. I mean, it's funny because we do all the different woods, all the different acrylic, cast, seamed, mahogany, maple, birch, whatever.
Yeah.
But we try to push the metal more often because for me, it's all handmade here. That's our own shell. It's our own voice. And again, back to the whole idea of having something usable and something that you could take on any gig and know that it's going to work. Just change out the heads, change your tuning, and you'll be good to go. So
yeah,
definitely our favorite to build as well.
Absolutely, man. Well, with those wooden reinforcement rings, there's, generally speaking, I guess people tend to go between two. It's either 45 degree or sort of the round over option. Is that probably the two most common options? Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, we have our edge, and that's all we put on drums. We've had a few people ask for different edges, but we typically try to push people towards our edge. Our edge works the best. We've gone through all the different iterations of edges, like the baseball bat or the full radius outer, the dual 45,
right?
All that stuff. We've done 30s. And for me, the 45 inner edge with a radius outer edge, and I'm not talking like a massive radius, and just a nice little 3-ply radius. That has been like our go-to since day one.
Wow.
So our re-rings are basically a 10-ply maple shell. Right?
Okay, gotcha.
And if you want to think about, if you're looking at the ply itself, we'll cut about 6 plies in at a 45-degree angle from the, as the inner edge. And then the outer is a 3-ply radius, which leaves 1 ply that we flatten. So that way you have a nice, perfectly flat surface that the head could sit on.
Right.
That little radius just nestles into that corner of a head perfectly, which gives you a wider tuning range.
Yeah.
And for us, it just works. And our shells are undersized. They're about, I'd say, a 1/16 of an inch under whatever the diameter is. So if it's a 16, it's like 15 and 15/16.
Right.
And having it undersized just allows the drum to sing a little bit, allows the head to sit and move around properly.
Wow. Man, that is awesome. So much fine tuning. God.
We've been doing it for a long time, and every time we make a happy mistake, we kind of, test it against something else, and we're like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. Let's just keep going that route. Or if it doesn't work out, then we'll go back to what we were doing before.
Right. Wow.
Just the evolution of how we build our drums. We're not sitting here, with everything under a microscope trying to figure out if we move this, a millimeter, is it going to make it better in some way? It's just sometimes a happy accident occurs and we go, that's something we got to continue with.
Totally.
As far as the edge goes, believe it or not, the edge is something that we carried over from Orange County Drum.
Okay.
With OC in particular, I would say, 98% of their wood kits were just straight 6-ply maple shells.
Right.
I've always been a fan of reinforcement rings. I like the extra attack. And so when we started doing reinforcement rings in our metal kits, it's almost about the same. It's 10-ply where, when we would do re-rings at Orange County Drum, it was what we call a 6-6 shell, which is a 6-ply shell,
right.
6-ply reinforcement ring. So we would cut the inner edge a little bit deeper, but we always maintained the same outer. It was like a 3-ply radius with a ply of flatness, and then whatever the inner is, that's what it was. And they always sounded so good to me. And again, it's just something I carried over. And instead of offering all these different edges like we used to with Q, I was like, this is our sound.
Right.
This is something very special to us. It doesn't sound like everybody else's drums. We're just going to do this. And we get a lot of people asking, can you give me the big back cut radius, edge? And it's just like, no, there's other companies that do that. If you want that sound, buy from those companies.
Right.
That's what they're good at. That's what they're known for.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try and turn us into what we're not.
Right.
So.
And also from your point, you've gone through all of these aforementioned phases of this stuff, and now having something that works especially well with a very specific kind of drum that you're designing, it would make sense that you would say, ultimately, if you want this kit to sound the best that it can sound, we're telling you, from our own experience, this bearing edge design is what works with it, right?
Absolutely. At least in my opinion, not that my opinion means anything, but
Yeah.
when I tune drums, I want them to sound a specific way.
Sure.
And so I want that translated into all of our drums. And when we build a drum kit, we ship them fully assembled. Each drum is individually boxed. We tune them before we even put them in the box, so that way when they get to the end user, it's like they open it up, they can put it in their kit and play, and it should sound just almost as close as possible to how we tuned it when it left up. Obviously, right. In shipping, it'll drop a little bit, but
yeah, totally.
That's the goal.
Nice. Yeah, and speaking of some of those older Ludwig drums, one of my buddies has a 60s sort of jazz kit, 12, 14-inch toms, 20-inch bass drum, of course. And then with those, it's because it's the 60s, it's one of the first times that I ever kind of encountered the reinforcement rings. And I'm not totally certain. I believe those 60s Ludwig kits, they might have been like a 3-ply shell because they're really thin shells. But then do you add the reinforcement rings that they were using on those? Do you happen to know what ply those reinforcement rings were that they were using on those 60s kits?
I'm not well versed in vintage drums as most of my counterparts are, but I have all the old Ludwigs that I've had. The actual re-ring wasn't plied; it was actually a steam bent piece of wood, and it's usually between 1/4 inch to like 3/8 of an inch thick.
Wow!
And so steam bent is basically just a block of wood that is steamed, and then it's malleable at that point, and then they put it in as a re-ring and glue it in, and it has a ground joint on it, and then they glue it up, and there you go.
Wow. Well, you mentioned as well doing acrylic drums. I have an old Vistalite. So it's pre-75 because it's got the smaller lugs on the 12-inch tom. I never actually looked at the serial numbers to date what exactly year it is, but it's pre-75.
Okay.
And it's funny, man. I've talked about it a good bit on this podcast throughout the years. Those early runs of acrylic kits I love them, but they're so temperamental, man. So I guess.
Oh
yeah, like just the bearing edges. You look at them, you're like, whoa, man, this is crazy.
They're pretty rough.
Oh yes, they are. With your acrylic kits, where are y'all getting the shells from, and are you doing the wooden reinforcement rings on those as well, or?
No, we don't do the wood re-rings on our acrylic drums. We actually get shells from 2 different manufacturers.
Okay.
And it really depends on what the client wants.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for colors or stripes or anything of that ilk, we use a company called Sterling. They're, in my personal opinion, they're the best of the drum shell acrylic makers. Their shells are always perfect. I mean, I've never had any issues with them. And they have a seam. They have a bridge on that seam to kind of keep everything pretty solid. Mm-hmm. But those aren't the shells that I like to use. The shells that I like to use come from a company called Spartan Townsend, and they're actually cast. And the difference between a cast shell and a seam shell, and I know there are companies that are making shells that say they're seamless. Mm-hmm. When they're not actually seamless, what they're doing is they do this technique where they weld the acrylic together so it appears seamless, which is cool.
Right.
But there's a big difference between that shell and an actual cast acrylic shell. Now, the cast acrylic shells that we get are made for aquariums. They're limited in sizes. Like they don't offer a 22. You can't get a 22 because nobody's ever needed an aquarium in a 22 inch. However, they do 20, they do 24, they do 20, 18, 16, 14, 13, 12. Like,
right.
It's hilarious that they do all the sizes that we would use except for a 22. But here's the difference between it. Now, companies like RCI or Sterling or these companies that do offer all the colored shells, the stripes and all that, they're taking a flat sheet of acrylic.
Right.
Then they have to heat it up, mold it around a form, and then they glue the seam or they weld the seam to create the look of a seamless shell.
Mm-hmm.
But in the heating up of that acrylic to bend around a form, once it cools, you've tempered that acrylic. And in the tempering process, all of a sudden now it's more brittle. So the sound that you get from something like that, you get this, a lot of times you'll get that basketball in a hallway in your floor tom or your bass drum, which we all know. Yeah. And a lot of that has to do with that tempering process. Now, with the cold cast acrylic, they take molten acrylic and they pour it into these cold molds. And when it hardens over time, it's a much softer material. And for some reason, they just sound so much better to me, and you're less likely to get the spidering effect, the cracks in it. And, and that's a big deal for me. So I always prefer to go that route, but you can only get them in clear. That's the only color that is offered. Again, they're made for aquariums. Yeah. They just sound so much better to me.
Wow. Damn. I got to check one of those out.
They are substantially more expensive, unfortunately.
Oh, I bet.
We used to get like half-inch thick shells from the same company, 1-inch thick shells. I mean, they're insane. Yeah. I don't think that those are necessary for snare drums. I think the thicker you go implies you're just raising the pitch and you don't get any body out of it. But the 1/4-inch stuff is what we use for our toms and bass drums, and they sound phenomenal.
Wow. Well, with the rims, I guess, be it die cast. I mean, I saw an amazing brass with matching cast brass hoops that y'all did that looked incredible, man.
Thank you very much.
Are y'all making the whether it be die cast, triple flange, etc. hoops, and even like the lugs? Is that something that y'all are making in house, or did y'all find someone to work with on that, or how does it work making those components?
Well, that particular brass drum that you're talking about, we have a very close friend of our shop named Troy Ziegler. He purchased that shell from the same company that's manufacturing like the DW brass shells.
Gotcha.
They're pretty well known in like the drum builder community. It's a company called Duluth out of I want to say they're out of Minnesota. They make great shells, and so Troy bought the shell and the hoops from them and then brought it to us to make. Wow. And what we did is we cut our own snare bed in it. We hand file all of our snare beds except for we have one series of snare drum called our Gentleman series where the snare bed profile on our Gentlemans are the same as the ones that we hand file, except it's pressed into the shell.
Gotcha.
But so we hand file all of our snare beds. And so with his snare drum, we cut our snare bed in it, we filed it out, we cut an outer edge on it, and then assembled it with drilled it out and assembled it with our hardware. It sounded unbelievable. So we'll probably be offering those in the near future, just because Duluth makes amazing brass shells. I mean, those guys know what they're doing, right? Even though they're not drummers and they don't. They're like, I don't know what this means, but we're making these. We're making a lot of them, so that's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as like our lugs, we designed our own lug, and we finally unveiled it this year at NAMM. It's been about 5 years in the making. Wow. It's been a long process, just trying to make sure, the proportions are right and everything like that. We are having them made overseas. Unfortunately, trying to have them made in the States is virtually impossible at the moment. Any place that does forging like that, the cost is astronomical. It's unbelievable. Wow. And the quality is usually pretty bad. So damn. Sadly, I hate saying that, but it's the truth. I mean, when I want to say it was about 2005 or 2006, Orange County Drum unveiled their lug, and we were having them made in the States, and the quality of the lugs were so bad that we ended up having to toss at least 25% of them of every batch that we got.
Whoa!
And the cost of them of the per lug was double what you would pay overseas.
My God, that's crazy.
Yeah, we were trying to do everything, American made.
I hear you.
And it was just it just wasn't worth it. And we even reached out to other forging facilities that could do it, and same thing. Price was just ridiculous, and the quality just wasn't there. So,
right.
With that, going into making our lugs, we knew exactly where we were going to go, and it took time making sure the process was done correctly. And when we got our first batch, they were perfect. And we were using the Slingerland beaver tails for 10 years, really.
Yeah.
And the one thing that we really wanted to do was have our own identity. And so finally getting our own lug has been amazing.
Definitely. Super cool. Reverting back to one thing that you mentioned earlier, you had said snare bed. And is that literally where the strings that hold the snares themselves come across the shell at the bottom, where the throw off and between the throw off and the butt plate? Is that, you file that down?
Yeah. So the snare bed is basically, if you look at the snare side of your drum, and when you flip over your drum, take the head off, you'll see like a little indentation on most snare drums.
Yep.
And basically that's where the snare wires will go across.
Yeah, exactly.
That affects how your snare drum sounds considerably. I know there are drummers out there that will refute that and say you don't even need a snare bed on your snare drum.
Right.
And I agree. You don't. If you want a specific sound, and that sound is a snare drum without a snare bed, yeah. you have that option. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The thing that I find very useful with a snare bed, especially if it's done properly, is you have full control over how your snare wires respond to the tuning of your drum.
Mm.
When there's no snare bed, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent. It
Totally.
is what it is, and it could sound great. If you're an amazing player, you can make a cardboard box sound great.
Right.
So it doesn't matter. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to sound like shit.
Right.
Period.
Yeah. Totally.
So being able to dial in how your snare responds to your snare drum, or how your snare wires respond to your snare drum, is key. And it allows you want to make them loose and open, or you want to make them really tight. You can do all of that if the snare bed is made properly. Now, a lot of drums, you'll find the snare bed itself is like a little half moon cut that sits between, sits about an inch inside each of the two lugs that it's in between. Okay. When you go to tension down that portion of the head, a lot of times you'll get a little crinkle in the head right there. And that's because you can't control the tension in that small space. So what we do is, when we cut our snare beds, all of our snare beds, they don't have any roundness to them whatsoever. They're perfectly flat, but they have like two little ramps leading in and out of this flat area.
Yep.
Directly underneath the lugs that basically surround the snare wires.
Right.
And this allows you full control over the tension in the snare beds. And again, like I said, you can use 10-strand snare wires. You can use 42-strand snare wires if you want, because our snare beds are wide enough, so you can control the tension using the head instead of using the actual throw off itself.
Right, exactly. I see. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, you need to use both, but the thing is when you start to loosen, like a lot of times what I'll find is, if I want the snare drum to be tensioned pretty high, but I want the snare wires to have a nice sizzle, I'll actually drop the tension of the 4 tension rods that surround the snare wires.
Right.
And it gives it a little bit of a softer area, and it allows for a looser snare wire sound.
Gotcha.
But it controls them so they don't just buzz for days and days.
Right. Is there a recording out there that you feel is kind of a blueprint for maybe some of the drums that you would ultimately make? Or is it more of just being a tech and seeing kind of what people need within a live environment, and then that kind of led you to sculpt what ultimately became Q drums?
It would definitely be the latter.
Yeah.
There's so much processing that goes into albums that,
Totally.
I mean, again, it could easily be a cardboard box,
Right.
you know, and you'd never, ever know it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely the live aspect. And also with the amount of touring that I've done and the bands that I've worked for, they always have some of the best front of house engineers in the world, and the feedback that I get from them, that's all that really matters.
Right.
You know, when they tell me something sounds amazing, okay, I know that's working. That's
Totally.
what I need to gravitate towards.
Mm-hmm.
Something sounds like shit. Okay, I better fix this. How do I fix this, and how do I get back to it sounding amazing? You know, and so I've been lucky enough to really benefit from that. And everyone that's worked at Q, we've all been techs on the road.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody that's worked at Q has not had a moment where they've been on the road and understanding what a drum needs to sound like, look like, how well it needs to handle the abuse of the road, whether it's in a van or it's in a 28 truck tour, you know? And that knowledge from all of us is really played a huge role in how we, number one, construct our drums, and number two, how we tune our drums and what we want them to sound like at the end of the day.
Right. Well, when you think back to your first drum set, what was it? And because I always like asking people that, but it's especially interesting talking to you and someone who has such an insight into, again, the whole manufacturing and design process. So tell me a little bit about your first drum set.
Oh, that poor first drum. I still have my very first drum kit.
You do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
It's a 60s Ludwig.
Wow.
That was given to me by a neighbor, and it had no bottom heads. It had all the bottom lugs removed. It was spray painted flat black.
Mm.
I mean, it was a giant piece of shit.
Wow.
And you see, I had it for about 7 months, and I had gotten a drum teacher, and the drum teacher's like, I don't know about this concert tom thing, but you should try to look into putting bottom heads on this. The drums will sound better. I'm like, okay, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So I bought lugs to put on the bottom of the drums, and that was my first time assembling drums. So I put, I bought the lugs, put all the bottom lugs on, bought some hoops and tension rods and all that, and I was like, oh wow, that does make a big difference.
Yeah.
You know, did the same with the bass drum, bought a bass drum hoop and the claws and all that shit. It was pretty funny.
Wow.
Yeah, I still have that kit. It sounds like shit, but I love it. And I'm sure, one of these days, I always tell myself, one of these days I should pull it out and fix it up. But then if I fix it up, it's not the same drum kit.
Totally. Oh man, that's good stuff. When you first started playing, man, did you have any particular drummers that you were especially loving playing along to? I mean, you mentioned you had a teacher as well. Was there any particular?
The three drummers that made me want to play drums, and I started a little later in life. I started playing drums about 17.
Mm-hmm.
But the three drummers that really, like, when I first started noticing what the drums could do, number one was Harvey Mason.
Oh yeah.
Number two was Jimmy Cobb.
Oh yeah.
And number three was Brad Wilk.
Gotcha.
So those three were like, obviously, you got the jazz, you got the fusion, and you got the rock. But I really, like, those were the three that I just was like, oh my God, this is what drummers do.
Absolutely.
Not that I could play like any of them, but that's what I, in my mind.
Yeah. Wow, man. Well, from rocking a beat up Ludwig kit to teching to working at Orange County and then having your own company in Q Drums, it's quite a journey, man. So thanks for rapping with me, man. It was cool getting into the nuts and bolts, if you will, of drum manufacturing, something that's always kind of fascinated me. So it was really cool. And again, I'm such a big fan of your drums. I think they sound great and they're super unique. So congrats, man.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, thanks for hanging, and thanks to Jeremy for a little tech talk up in there. Definitely love those Q drums, and man, I just think they're making a great product, and it was super cool talking to him about the specs, the manufacturing, and getting it all going, I look forward to doing some more of these. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Crash, bang, boom.